They or figure I can't talk. Let me try again. 4 pints of refrigerator pickles, or did it again. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Autumn Leigh at Home. I'm Autumn Leigh. Today we are going to water bath can pickled okra. And we were gifted this by a family member, and I don't want it to go to waste. A lot of it went into our freezer for fried okra over the year, and we can use it at different times. But I wanted to be able to water bath can some pickled okra because we made refrigerator pickled okra in a different video, which I will tag on to the end of this video if you are interested in watching it. And it was a big hit. There was a handful of our family members, and myself included, that was very surprised at how much we actually really liked it. So I decided to try to water bath can some so that we can preserve some over the season, especially because we were gifted this and I don't want it to go bad. So we are going to do that today. So please follow along and we'll go ahead and get started. If you are new to water bath canning or pressure canning or preserving food, I do have a playlist that you're welcome to go and look at. It's one that kind of has multiple different varieties of preserving food in it, mainly being canning of different sorts, so water bath canning and pressure canning. I even have a video that explains the difference between the two, so feel free to check that out. Here we are starting with clean cans or clean jars. You don't have to sterilize your jars anymore. You can just wash them, make sure they're squeaky clean. I always wash mine before putting them back on the shelf, but because they sit on the shelf, there's always the chance that obviously they collect dust or any other sorts of things that may happen to get in them. So I always like to start off with washing them again. You can run them through the dishwasher, either way, just a clean one. And I will put the link below that explains why it's no longer necessary to sterilize your jars. I'll put that link in the description below so you can go through and kind of read that. Always feel free to fact check me. If I am wrong, I am more than happy to for you guys to teach me as well. So I am learning with you guys. I have been canning about 2 or 3 years now, and I will say it's getting easier. I know sometimes it can be very daunting, very much so in the beginning when you're learning all the terminology. You feel like there's so many steps, it can be overwhelming while you're doing it. I totally understand that, and I am here for you. I'm here to encourage you that it is doable. I don't have friends or family that really can. I taught myself through YouTube channels and reading and that sort of thing. So I am very much a visual learner, and YouTube has very much helped me see what the book is talking about. So learning the terminology and having people kind of explain the terminology was very helpful for me. So that's what I'm hoping to do for you guys as well, and help you learn how to can or do different things. If you've been following my channel and watching some of the videos, you will know that a few videos back I said that I was hoping to can and do different things almost at least once a week, if not every other week. Unfortunately, this summer turned out totally different than I had originally planned, mainly because our air conditioning kept going in and out. So for the past 5 or 6 weeks, we were having issues with our unit freezing over, and we had 3 different air companies come out, and finally the third air company was able to figure out what was going on. The other 2 they kept saying, we think this is wrong, but nobody could tell us what was going on. So I'm very, very, very grateful that we finally have the air working. I just didn't want to do any canning projects while the air was out, because obviously canning in your kitchen can make the kitchen super hot because you're boiling water for a few hours at a time, or even sometimes up to 3 or 4 hours, depending on what's going on. But we are just very grateful to have that air conditioning fixed and back working, and we are able to start these canning projects again, which I didn't realize how much I missed being in the kitchen. I don't think I realized that until I started doing this canning project, and it just felt so good to be able to do these projects again. I think it's kind of therapeutic in some ways, that it just gives you a project to work on. And not only that, but it helps you save money in the long run. Once you have the tools to do canning, it can be a little pricey up front, but once you have all the tools, these tools last for a very long time. You can have them for years and years and years and years. You can ask anybody that's been canning. They usually have the same pressure canner or water bath canner for a very extended period of time. So even though it's expensive up front, once you have the established canning supplies and things and tools that you need, you end up saving money in the long run with vegetables that you grow. You can preserve them so you're not having to buy them from the store, and you know exactly what you're eating. It's healthier because you're growing it and there's no other added preservatives in it. So I'm very happy to be back in here and being able to work on these projects with you guys. Now that we have our clean jars, we are ready to do our next step. That is to put the clean jars in the water bath canner. The water bath canner, we will be filling this all the way above the jars, so every jar will get water. That's different than the pressure canner. Pressure canners, you usually only fill it a couple inches at the bottom. So this one you want to fill up all the jars, and the only reason we're doing this, we're not doing it to sterilize them, I'm doing it to warm them up so that they are the same level and the same temperature as the liquid or the brine that we will be making. The reason we're doing water bath canning is because you have to do that for high acidic foods. So like peaches, apples, tomatoes, all of those are water bath canning because the pH level is a lot higher. Today, typically, if we were to just can okra, I believe that would, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that would be pressure canning. I need to go and double check, but I think that would be pressure can. The reason that we're doing water bath canning today is because it is pickled okra, and the brine, which is the liquid that goes in the jars and the okra is sitting in, that's called the brine. One of the primary ingredients in the brine is vinegar. So distilled white vinegar of at least 5% is the primary ingredient, and that changes the acidity level of the liquid in what's in the jar, and therefore it allows us to water bath can instead of pressure can. So this is the book that I'm using. It shows the pickled okra or okra pickles recipe right there. I did leave out the hot peppers, and I researched it to make sure that that was okay. It didn't change anything. Apparently the hot peppers are just for added heat. If you like spicy things, then that would add heat to the flavor. I did try these and they taste fantastic. I did not need the peppers at all. So it just depends on your flavor or your preference. If you prefer spicy things, then you can add the hot peppers in there too from this recipe. I chose to leave them out because my kids are the ones that are primarily going to be eating this. The other difference is that this called for 3.5 pounds of okra, and as you can see on the scale, I only have a little less than 2 pounds of okra, and it's supposed to make 4 pints of pickled okra once you're finished water bath canning. I found that it was actually more than that, and it could be because I didn't stuff the jars as full as I should have stuffed them. I'm not really sure if that was maybe the reasoning behind it, why I ended up with 4 pints even though I only had 2 pounds of pickled okra, but that's fine. You do whatever works best for you guys, and ultimately it's not the amount of okra I'm using isn't going to change the ability to water bath can it. I can still water bath can it, and if I end up with less pints, then that's fine too. So here I'm just adding all of my ingredients and I'm creating the brine. Now that I have my okra cleaned and washed, I'm just setting it to the side while I make the brine, and I'm mixing the different ingredients so that I can put it on the stove, and I want to bring this up to a boil and then let it simmer. So once it reaches a boil, I turn it back off or down a good bit and then let it simmer for 5 minutes. You want to be careful not to burn this, so make sure you're stirring it because the items inside can burn and you don't want that flavor in your pickled okra. The ingredients here, the reason for bringing it to a boil is that they all incorporate together so that once you have it sitting on your shelf, you're not going to see the salt or the sugar or different things separate. By bringing it up to a boil, it allows all of that to incorporate and it remains a solid liquid. Now you're still going to see the dill seed, but that's actually really pretty to see in there. And then in this process, you wait to add the cloves of garlic to the jars later. So you don't put that in the brine. You can, and I found out when I was refrigerator pickling okra, making refrigerator pickle okra, that garlic actually can turn blue when you're boiling it in an acidic liquid. So like they turn blue in vinegar. And that's what happened in my last video, which again, I will put at the end of this video so that if you wish to make refrigerator pickled okra, then that works for you a little bit easier. If you don't want to have to deal with canning, then you can watch that video as well. And I will link that on to the end, you'll see it. At this stage of the canning process, I have my jars warming on the stove at a medium low just to get them nice and warm, as well as my brine coming up to a boil. It's not quite there yet, but once it reaches that, I will lower it to a simmer for 5 minutes. So now that I have both of those on the stove and they're getting warmed up together, I am moving on to getting all of my canning supplies and equipment out. If you are new to canning, I will quickly go over some of my canning tools with you. If you are an avid canner and you've been doing it for a long time, feel free to skip ahead to the next portion of the pickling okra. But right now I am searching through my rings and looking through just to make sure that there's no dings, no rust, anything like that. When you can with the same rings for a while, sometimes they can start getting rust on them or get dings or bents, anything like that. You want to make sure that you have nice, normal rings and clean so that you can without causing any more issues with sealing the jars or rust getting in your food, of course. So now that I have those rings, I have my lids, and you want to be careful not to touch the rubber on the inside of the lid. Otherwise, you could possibly put oil from your skin on there and again cause sealing issues. So again, if you touch it, it's not a big deal. You could still try to use it. Just know that the more you touch it, the more high risk you have of your jars not sealing. This is a funnel that I use to pour that just makes it a lot easier. This tool right here that I'm showing you allows you to check for head space, and each stair step has a different number. You can see it goes up from an inch to 3/4, half an inch, and 1/4 of an inch. And that just depends on what you're canning, how much headspace you need. You also saw me pick up tongs a few minutes ago that are jar tongs that allow you to pick up the hot jars without needing to. And this is the preserving book that I am currently using the recipe out of. I can see my brine is almost ready. I have been having it simmer, so I'm going to go ahead and bring my warm jars from the stove over to the counter and go ahead and start pulling those out. That way I can start stuffing them with the okra. And I am not a professional at this, so this is my first time canning pickled okra, and I think I could have stuffed these jars a little bit better after the fact looking at them. I was trying to think of it kind of like pickles. You don't want them floating to the top, but unfortunately I was not successful in that. They still floated, but they still taste fine and they turned out fine and they're still fully edible. Just know if you have ones that float and they're sitting above the liquid line, they can cause discoloration, but they're still safe to eat as long as there's no mold on them, which again, that would be more of a sealing issue versus actually having issues in your jar. I'm pouring the hot water that is sitting in the jars back into the container or the pot just because I'm going to need that hot water for later. When I put these jars back in the pot, I need the water to be an inch above each jar. And you'll see later on, I will actually need to add a little bit more water because it's not quite an inch, but it's pretty close. So it turns out pretty well. Right now, I brought my brine back over because it is finished boiling and simmering for 5 minutes. I'm stuffing my okra into the jar, and you want to work kind of fast. You don't have to rush through, but you do want to stay focused because the idea is you want all of the items about the same temperature. So you want the jars and the brine to still both be hot. Otherwise, you can run the risk of cracking your jars by putting a cold brine into a hot jar or vice versa, just making sure that everything's about the same temperature. So I'm trying to stay focused, getting the okra in, and then I will slowly be able to pour the brine over the okra. And you can see here that I also added 1 clove to each jar at the bottom, and that way you can get that in there without causing your garlic clove to turn blue. You can pickle any size okra, however, because we are using pint-sized jars and I am intending these to be like a snack that my kids can snack on, I wanted to choose smaller okra. So the family member that gifted us these okra very kindly also separated out the smaller ones so that we were able to pickle the small ones and freeze the other ones that maybe were a little bit bigger, and that turned out beautifully. These jars, I stuffed as many as I could, upside down, right side up, in there, and I thought I did a good job, but once I was done processing these, I realized that there was still a lot of space. And that's going to happen. It doesn't mean anything bad. It just is a learning curve. And over time, I think that that's something that you can kind of improve on. Ultimately, the goal of actually pickling these and using them for a snack, the fact that you're going to eat them is more important than them looking pretty on a shelf. So always keep that in mind, especially when you're learning how to can. Give yourself grace. It doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's safe to eat and you followed all of the instructions. If you are new to canning, give me a thumbs up down below. I'm so happy you're here, and I just want to encourage you that you have got this. Just take one step at a time. It can be overwhelming at first, but just do that one step at a time like we talked about before, and over time you will look back and you will see how far you've come, and that now the things that I thought just seemed so big, like I didn't want to miss a step, they just seem a lot more minuscule. And I know the more I do this, the more I practice, the easier it will get. And it will be the same for you as well. So just take that one step at a time, learn one new term at a time, and over time it will gradually get easier. I had a few okra left over, so I just went ahead and put them in a 5th jar, and I did pour the brine over those as well, but instead of water bath canning, I just used those kind of like refrigerator pickles and just stuck them in the refrigerator, and we did already eat all of those, and they still tasted great, so that worked out really well. It was just a few extra, so I didn't want to try to water bath can a jar with only a few in them. But here our jars are completely full now of okra, so I am measuring headspace to make sure that we have at least half an inch of headspace. Headspace is the amount of space between the liquid or the fruit or vegetable and the top rim of the jar, and that will be different depending on what you're actually canning. You may actually end up checking headspace a few different times. So here I check headspace with the actual okra, and now that I'm adding the brine into each jar, you will have to end up checking headspace again. And then once you add the brine, you actually need to debubble or burp the jars is what some people call it as well. And that's where you can use a spoon, you can use a knife, you can use a chopstick, or in my case, I usually use the end of the headspace measuring tool. So I just flip it upside down and I'll use the other end to debubble or burp the jars. And that is where you take the jars, and because you're adding okra and liquid in there can be trapped air inside the jar underneath those vegetables. And by burping the jars, the way you do it is you kind of just gently move the stick around in the jar, kind of bending it back and forth to gently press the vegetables from side to side to release those air pockets. Otherwise, you run the risk, again, you increase the risk of your jars not sealing because you don't have the proper headspace, or for whatever reason, the liquid may end up being higher than it's supposed to be. But by burping the jars, you then have to remeasure headspace because you've let some air out of those jars and out of the liquid. So the headspace or the vegetables may have changed because of that. So you will remeasure the headspace again. And you can honestly wait until this step to actually do that. And you'll see here that I actually started putting the lids on because I forgot to burp the jars, but here I'm measuring headspace, and I will then add those lids onto the jar and realize that I forgot to burp them. So I take the lids back off, I burp them, and then put the lids back on. Measuring headspace, I started having a little bit of an issue getting an accurate headspace count because the okra kept floating to the top, which it happens. It happens with pickles as well. That's just kind of part of it. Again, I thought I stuffed these pretty tight, but apparently I did not. So I kept trying to push the okra back down so that I could get a proper headspace. And I'm going back through and just making sure that I'm topping off the ones that maybe need a little bit more liquid or brine in them. I have all of my brine in there. I'm remeasuring headspace again, which again you do multiple times. Once this is done, my next step is to clean the rims of the jar while also checking for dings that you can maybe feel but can't see. And to clean the rims of the jar, I'm using white distilled vinegar and feeling along the edge while wiping the edges off. You don't want to, if you can at all help it, touch the rims of the jars, because otherwise you could get your skin's oil on the jars. Or depending on what you're canning, especially jelly or things that are fatty. So another video I did pressure canning ground beef, and that just had a lot of grease to it. I was nervous that my jars wouldn't seal because of all the grease. So the white vinegar helps cut that, either whether it's sugary liquid or greasy liquid, whatever may be sitting on the rim of the jar, it helps clean those off. Here's where I forgot to burp my jars, so I'm taking my lids back off, trying not to touch the rims or the rubber seals, and then I go through and I'm burping my jars and releasing all of those little pockets of air. I will then double check headspace again just to make sure that we have the proper headspace, as well as re-clean the rims of the jars just to make sure, again, no liquid or brine got on the rims of the jars. All of those multiple steps and having to redo these steps could have been avoided if I had just burped them in the first place. But again, you live, you learn, and practice makes perfect. So that's one of the mistakes that I made, and I fixed it in time and was able to catch it and then keep going. So I want to share with you guys my flaws as well as my failures and my successes, all of it, so that you know that this is not perfect. We are not perfect in this kitchen, and we just do our best and try new things and learn as we go. That's the fun part about it being your kitchen, is that you get to try new things and it can be fun rather than stressful. Now that everything's put together, I am putting those rims back on and putting the rings on after I set the lids on. So the rings, you want to twist them until they're finger tight, and then just a smidge more. Just give them a little bit stronger of a twist till you meet a little bit of resistance. You do not want to crank the lids on as tight as possible. You just want to kind of turn them until you meet resistance, and then just a little bit more. Here's an example of why I like to check my rings. You can see that there's just a little bit of rust on there, so I want to leave this one out. Our jars are full, the lids are getting put on with the rings, and our next step is to take these jars and put them back into the water bath canner with at least an inch of water above them. Now, if you wanted to, you could just leave all of these jars in the water bath canner and pull one out at a time to stuff and put the brine on. I was just afraid that I would skip steps if I did that, because and it's not as efficient, but it does help the jars stay warmer during the process. To me, it's not as efficient, so it's not my favorite way of doing it. I'm afraid that I will either miss a step or mess something up, because you're stuffing each jar with the okra and you're putting the brine in, and then each step you're doing separate with each jar versus all the steps with each jar at one time. So it's just whatever, that's a preference. It's whatever works best for you. Now I'm putting these jars back in. I'm going to make sure that there's at least an inch of water above. I noticed that in this case there wasn't, and it's very heavy. I noticed in this case there wasn't an inch of water above, so I did get a little bit of extra water and added it. That way we got to that 1 inch. I put it on medium high to get these jars going. You know, here in the South, they always say a watched pot never boils. So maybe walk away, give it time to start boiling, because you want it to come to a rolling boil, which is what you saw there. That is where you can stir it and it will not go away. The bubbles will not stop. Once that happens, for pickled okra, our processing time was 15 minutes. That means when you see the rolling boil and you see that the bubbles are not going away, start your timer and you process or can them, or water, let them sit in the boiling water for 15 minutes. And then you want to leave them on the stove to let them cool for at least, I would say 10 minutes, if not longer. And then you are able to pull them out. After you pull them out, go ahead and let them sit on the counter for at least 12 hours. Then make sure that they sealed. The way you do this is the lid will kind of suction inward, and you need to take the rings off before putting them on the shelf, and the lid should stay sealed. Thank you so much for joining me here at Autumn Leigh at Home. Please like, subscribe, and share down below, and I hope to see you guys next time.